Pay attention to world events. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, obviously, I should add that in there, I awoke from a disturbing dream. I was on a ship that was on fire. The captain was dying of a heart attack, and some young people, former students I had taught in New York in the waking life, were asking for help. Since I taught in New York for 14 years, the odds are that some of my former students died on 9/11. When I woke, still having heard nothing of the tragedy but disturbed by the dream, I picked a card from the Zaporacle and got this one, which was already titled, Pay Attention to World Events. It is one thing to consciously abstain for a limited time to regain emotional equilibrium. It is quite another to be ignorant of the world out of laziness and neglect. Thomas Jefferson, or someone, we don't actually know who said this, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. If you're not paying attention to world events, you're not being vigilant. Another rationalization people commonly use to excuse their inattention to current events is, the media is all corporate-controlled propaganda. There are plenty of corporate, non-corporate controlled news sources, some of them excellent. But in my experience, those who scorn the corporate-controlled news media tend to gravitate toward the lowest quality of alternative news media. Their worldview tends to be a pastiche of paranoid urban legends and the fever dreams of conspiracy theorists. A person, and by the way, there are conspiracies, it's just that most conspiratists really suck at locating and correctly understanding the actual conspiracies that are out there. A person who only watched corporate-controlled media, except Fox News, is far better informed, and even on Fox News, there are a couple of decent shows, is far better informed than people who are getting their news from conspiratists. For example, I've heard that anarcho-syndicalist and libertarian socialist Noam Chomsky relies on the Wall Street Journal more than any other news source. His reasoning is that capitalists require accurate information to know how to invest their money. He obviously reads the New York Times because he quotes it often. And here's a little bit more of the sort of ignorance I'm talking about. Shortly after 9/11, in an article called Left Off Balance, I noted the following in a discussion of shadow projection amongst people on the left. Here's a classic example that happened just yesterday. I sent this out as like an email to a few friends. I got on email and find messages from two different people, a dire chainmail petition that tells me that they, as if there's some kind of non-binary dark saucer out there, you always hear such people talk about they. There's always a mysterious dark they, are trying to sneak through an amendment to the Constitution, trying to outlaw gay marriages. I scroll down and see some very intelligent people I know have added their names and addresses to this document. It was like a chain email. After a stunned moment, I realize this is utter nonsense. It is impossible to sneak in an amendment to the Constitution that requires huge congressional majorities and is going to be a huge, drawn-out, high-profile, high-publicity process. The Constitution has not been amended in decades. I'm no expert. I slept through civics class in high school too, but isn't this general knowledge? People I knew were forwarding this bogus bit of propaganda, adding their names to it because their shadow projection makes them gullible and able to be blindsided by darkness. Because they so easily project the shadow onto a they, which they believe runs every governmental and media decision. There's always some, as in all the conspiracy theories, there's always like one group of puppet masters controlling everything. Whereas like what the phenomenal world shows us is that there are competing spheres of power, not one set of puppet masters, or things would work very differently. And they, which they believe runs every governmental and media decision, and because of that belief, they were easily made fools of with this email, manipulated by somebody who very likely just wanted their names and addresses for a shadowy purpose of some sort. It never occurred to them that shadow might instead manifest from what seemed like their own number. They were giving away voluntarily their info, their privacy, because their shadow projection blinded them to the multivalent aspect of darkness. It shows up everywhere. Most people are murdered not by the government, not by terrorists, but by people they are close to, and even more often by themselves, particularly via bad health habits and, of course, suicide. Another example of the failure to discern shades of gray are the constant statements I'm hearing that are variations of, they have complete control of the media, it's all just wartime propaganda, it's all lies. An example of this point of view is a very amusing recent Tom Tomorrow cartoon. In the cartoon, and again this is all in the aftermath of 9/11, many years ago now, in the cartoon, two news anchor people are going to give a report on why they hate us. The camera turns to a female TV person and she says, they hate us because we're free. The male anchor person gets on and sniggers that they probably deserve a Pulitzer for that. So I laugh at this cartoon, go with its point of view, because I hate plastic news anchor types and love biting sarcasm. But then I look up and see this week's Newsweek. Can't get more mainstream media than Newsweek, at least at that time. Now Newsweek sort of barely exists. And see the cover says, why they hate us. I have it in front of me right now. Inside, I don't find they hate us because we're free. I find a 20-page article that begins with the sentence, to dismiss the terrorists as insane is to delude ourselves, unquote. 4 sentences later, they dismiss the statement, we stand for freedom and they hate it, unquote. Then follows a nuanced, probing look into cultural, religious, geopolitical variables that have brought their hatred about. The West is not portrayed wearing a white hat. They also state, quote, the daily exposure to Israel's iron-fisted rule over the occupied territories has turned this into the great cause of the Arab and indeed the broader Islamic world, unquote. Elsewhere, they look at American policy in the region as, quote, cynically geared to America's oil interests, supporting thugs and tyrants without hesitation, unquote. Does this article have a bias or 2 or 3 or more? Sure. How could it be otherwise? What human account of events doesn't? But it is full of relevant information, most of which is factually true. On the other hand, if I believe that mainstream media is in lockdown mode, that's what they were saying at the time, or now they just say it's all lies, then I never bothered to read Newsweek, since I know in advance corporate control media is all lies. In the aftermath of September 11, I hear people on the left state adamantly that they have the media in complete lockdown mode. But often I hear this point of view from callers calling into nationally broadcast talk shows, especially on NPR. NPR still gets some money, if not as much as they should, from the government. Most radio call-in shows use screeners. They can easily and invisibly control the content by whom they allow on. Caller after caller after caller to a show I listened to in NPR had a radical leftist point of view and were unilaterally criticizing the U.S., saying on national radio that they control the press. There's no freedom of press. It's just what the government and corporations want us to know. None of them seemed struck by the irony that they were saying this on a national broadcast heard by possibly millions. More people listened to NPR at that time, probably. When I pointed this out to leftist friends, I hear, you see, they're just allowing that so you'll think there's a free press. And that was the end of passage. From something I wrote in the immediate aftermath of 9/11 called Left Off Balance. And then I give link to many of my other writings related to this, such as problems with the conspiratist worldview and so forth. can check the politics, news, and world events category of the site for more on politics. But pay attention. It's your responsibility as a citizen to do that. And, I try and talk to often Gen Zs, for example. A lot of my friends are Gen Z, about what's going on with world affairs, and they kind of act like, some of them, like, oh, this is like old person hobby talk, as if I were talking about, obscure points about being fly fishing or golf or something like that. Meanwhile, they're of drafting age. I'm not going to get drafted. They would be if there was enough of a war. And it's what happens in politics is going to drastically affect their quality of life. And one of the reasons why young people are getting screwed over all the time is because they don't vote enough. But nobody's going to take away the stuff for old people like me, like Medicare. We spend much more on old people than we do on children, because old people like me vote. So pay attention to world events. Don't wait until they bite you in the ass.